started. Okay, so welcome to tonight's session of the 2020 PMI Fair, and the session will be about projects as homework with Stuart Copeland. We'll see later a little bit about Stuart and the subject of the session. But first of all, let me say thank you to our gold sponsors, Mine Manager and ProSUS, who allowed us and are supporting us to deliver these really interesting sessions throughout the week. Just a few hints. As said, the session will be recorded, and the recording will be available on pmfair.org. And as well, the presentation will be made available at the same place. Thank you, Stuart, for agreeing to share your slides. Okay. So, but this does not apply to you anymore as attendees because your microphone is not on mute. Actually, it is on mute, but you can unmute it on your own. Camera the same. In any case, I mean, to communicate, we have the chat. You find it usually on the right panel of your application. Watch it as well for a little bit more information. And yeah, we say chat is the place to raise questions for the speakers, but we made you panelists, so you can say raise your hand and ask a question directly, I would say. I will put these details for the PDU claim afterwards in the chat so that they are made available to everyone. And you have the chance to win 1 year free membership of the PMI chapter in your country, either Belgium, Netherlands, or Luxembourg. So stay with us until the end of the session, and you will have a chance of winning. Okay. So I think that we can. So I can hand over to you now, Stuart. Okay. So that you can share your slides and can progress with the introduction. So I made you a presenter.
Okay, it looks like that's worked.
Yeah, came to you.
And here we go, press the button. And yeah. In theory, you should be seeing some slides.
We do.
Excellent.
Good. Well, I said so. A few words on Stuart before starting to introduce him. He's a program and project lead, really focused on profit, and he's as well a mentor in the field of project management. He has worked with many organizations supporting complex and risky business change programs. That's why he's defined as a tricky business change. He's worked with many large corporations, including Volkswagen Group and SAC, and he's a member as well of the Chartered Management Institute, the Institute of Interim Management, and the British Computer Society, and is as well a Prince 2 accredited. And last but not least, he is the co-author of a book which is the People Project Triangle, which describes the prevalence of projects as homework. Then what are their impacts, and how to diagnose and then mitigate the risk to the ones that are involved. And just a few words for me on the subject of the session with Stuart, which I found really interesting, especially for myself, because that's something that I'm living, let's say, in my reality since almost 3 years now. So where we don't work with a dedicated project team anymore, but we have people coming from, let's say, around the business to work on projects. And I really look forward then to have more details from you, Stuart. Then I hand over to you, please.
Thanks very much, Francesca. That's a lovely introduction. So good evening, everybody. As we alluded to before, I've been running projects for 25 years. As organisations have become leaner over that time, I work more frequently with people from the business who must juggle their day job working on a project. When this happens, and if they're managed badly, there are significant risks to the project itself, business as usual, and most importantly, to the well-being of the people involved. I've learned a lot on the way over that long journey. So I collaborated with Andy Copeland, who's pictured there. Led us to write Triangle, as Francesco just said. It's aimed at helping project leaders balance that business as usual, but most importantly, people's welfare. And that's today's topic. I'll be covering what is meant by a composite project, why they will become more common, why it matters, and what the risks are, and to ensure a successful outcome. So let's start with, we'll recognise this. How many of these phrases have you heard? Sorry, it's month end, so I can't attend your project meeting. No, don't want to get involved. I still haven't recovered from the last project I did. I can't help with your requirements session. There's a crisis in the warehouse. Or, oh no, another project I'll have to do as homework. And whilst I've heard those over the years, but the final one is actually the reason I heard that in about 2006, which stimulated the idea behind the book. So I'm hopeful that you will have heard some of those things, because it will make this session better for you. But if you've heard these phrases, you're in the right place. And if you haven't, I have no doubt that you'll see them in the future. So a bit of context. Why are people having to juggle with their day job and their project work? As organisations have become leaner, medium important, medium complex projects are increasingly staffed by in-house resources. In a book, we call these composite projects. I'll assume that you've all seen the project triangle, which is a balance between scope, time, cost. But for these composite projects, we argued that there is a people project triangle. And this is a trade-off between the project, the ongoing business, and the people working in both. When the pressure mounts, generally only two of those can be prioritised, and one must give. And in, well, my experience and Andy's experience, it's usually the people who bear the brunt. And the risk is there are implications of stress and burnout to go with it. So, what do we mean by a composite project? Well, let's have a look at how projects can be categorised. The grey bars on this diagram represent a spectrum from the more tactical projects on the left-hand side to the more strategic on the right-hand side. I'm sure you'll understand the language, even if you haven't seen it laid out this way before. But if you think about your current project now, why don't you try categorising by how complex it is, how critical it is to the business, how much it is costing, how many staff you have, and how the project is structured. I'll give you a couple of seconds to absorb that. But if you've got any comments or thoughts, then please put them into the chat. I can't see that in the way that I'm viewing the screen at the moment, but Francesco will interrupt me if there's anything that we want to talk about.
Yeah, actually, Stuart, I think the participants, as they are panelists, they can unmute themselves if they want to ask a question. So okay. Please go ahead if you have questions.
Thank you. So moving on, if we look at these levels in a bit more detail, we talk about a level 3 project, which would have a low cost of failure. So, for example, it could be an office move in an existing building. It might just be one department, low cost, and no significant change in the daily operation. If we look at a level 1 project, then I believe that these are broadly understood. So these are the massive projects, the one with huge budgets, full-time dedicated teams. For example, that could be a new factory with a head office, new processes and new systems. So they're really huge projects. And finally, our composite projects. So these sit in the middle. So an example might be the creation of a new product. And these are the sorts of things that I often get involved in. The new product or the new service could be quite strategic. but it would require a lot of business expertise, and therefore it's really hard to get that expertise from anywhere else other than from the business itself. This isn't a scientific definition, but you are likely to find people from the business working in composite projects. You could say that if it's not a level 3 project and it's not a level 1 project, then it's probably a composite. Again, please shout if you don't understand.
I shout, but it's not because I don't understand. Your camera's frozen again.
Okay. I'll just...
Yeah, Stuart, the term composite, I thought it was going to refer to like a mix of dedicated people and the people who have to run their day job as well. Is that correct? Or
yes, yeah. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with the sort of forms where you got. So yes, there'll be some people seconded on the project. There'll be some people from outside. And then there'll be some people who continue to do their day job as they do that.
Whereas on the level 1, you have almost 100% dedicated people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's not a sort of a scientific assessment. It gives us an idea how we can describe composite projects.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Let me just. Let me see if I can just sort my camera out. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, there we go. I'm moving again. That's good. Okay. So moving on to why I believe that there'll be more business change. Again, I don't think I'm making a prediction here that people would disagree with, but in the book we plot the journey to today's lean organisation, and we talk about this being the reason for the evolution of composite projects. I think the COVID-19 crisis will only add to this. If you cast your mind back to the global financial crisis, the banks were told by governments to bolster their capital reserves to ensure that some of the problems that we had then couldn't reoccur. And I believe that shareholders in today's businesses will probably be looking to do the same thing. They want to increase the fat in balance sheets and improve companies' business continuity arrangements. I mean, I guess we're all working differently now. I certainly am, and I expect that a lot of what we're doing today will stay forever. Therefore, organisations have already started adapting their day-to-day operations, their property requirements, their travel policies, and so on. I think we can all see that. When it comes to being a customer, you will all have changed your buying habits, I suspect. Maybe more local, maybe more online. In general, customer behaviour and expectations have changed during lockdown. I think we all went on a 12-month digital training course compressed into about 4 weeks while we were stuck at home. And organisations are already changing to reflect this. And they'll have to do this fast to avoid losing market share. It should lead to lots of projects. Most businesses are in recovery right now, but it will come, I'm guessing here, but in the next few months. Certainly it's been quiet for now, but it seems to me that the business change agenda will have to move quite quickly. So I'd imagine that many of us who earn our living from running projects may be a bit busy in the future. So of these business change projects, why will it be that many of them will be composite projects? I'm old enough to have experienced several recessions. I know that's why I've got no hair and what I have got is grey. But I think the normal recession behaviour will apply. So there is already pressure on spend. Headcounts are being aligned to demand. Project backlogs are being prioritised to those that are absolutely business critical. And at the moment, there's a sort of a short-term reluctance to use external support, what with furlough and redundancy still on the cards. So I think for these reasons, that's why we're likely to see even more people working on projects as homework. So, any questions or queries at this stage? Thank you. I'll move on. Well, that's all well and good, but why do we need to worry about composite projects? I'd argue that there's nothing wrong with composite projects, provided they're recognised in the first place, and that when they're recognised, they're managed, was set up and managed properly. However, it's really important to appreciate that the business as usual world of your project team, it's really important to appreciate the business as usual world of your project team. And I think it's important as a project manager to take time and understand the operational and project environments and why they're different, how the business as usual and project cultures differ, and the risks to the project, to business as usual, and to the people involved. So, taking the project in the business as usual and project environment, what do we think the difference is? I would argue that for project managers not used to the composite project environment, the experience can be very frustrating. Here are some examples of the differences to BAU. It's not an exhaustive list, but it will give you a sense of what we mean and how it might affect your project. So when talking about responsibility, authority, tasks, stability and focus, BAU can be seen as more stable and projects as more fluid. I'd hope you recognise some, if not all of these, but again, if you disagree or want to query them, then please use the chat or unmute yourself. So moving on to the difference between the sort of business as usual culture and project culture. What's the differences? Again, this isn't going to be an exhaustive list, but it will give you a sense of what we mean and how it might affect the behaviour of people in the project team. They may be very impatient in meetings and want things to be done quickly. They may leap to solution mode before the problem is fully assessed. They may dismiss upfront thinking and planning as just procrastination, and so regard detail in project documents as being a waste of time. They may not understand the project methodology and approaches and find it difficult to relate to them. And I think that's all well and good, but how might it affect your project? And again, this is based on quite a significant amount of experience, and you see this quite frequently in composite projects. If there's a customer or operational emergency, then you may well lose people from your requirements workshops, your project meetings. There may be an issue with them being able to complete tasks. There will be financial or operational or seasonal peaks during the weeks, months, years, and it's really important that you build your plan around that. Many people will have their management objectives based on their day job and sometimes not on their project tasks. So therefore you have a permanent tension between that as people do more of their project work as homework. And there can be resentment from business as usual. Other managers may resent their team's time spent on the project. Again, any questions at this stage? I think hopefully it's clear.
Yes, Stuart.
Excellent.
That's clear.
So
I recognize the situation.
Exactly. From my side, you are really describing my reality, as I said.
Excellent. So it's not just me then.
No.
Okay. Right. So I think it's really important that we cover off the the risks, because all of this is all well and good, but really the question that we need to ask ourselves is, so what? The risks are higher on a composite project because of the inherent tension between BAU and the project. So if we start with project issues, let's look at the risks around the project. The BAU and project tension will be connected with time, focus and motivation, i.e. removing time from the project, removing focus when people are busy, and it might be tough to get them motivated to do the work on the project. The cost scope, etc., that comes under pressure because resources aren't available at short notice. And there may be an impact on future projects. And this is really hard to take if it happens on a project that you've been involved in, is that people will never want to volunteer for another project again. Again, all risks, but I have certainly seen some of these factors in the past. On business as usual, the impact can be on organisational performance. So this is the opposite of the first project, because there are cases where the people will choose their project work ahead of their day job. Sometimes projects, the project environment can actually be more interesting than their day job. Where projects are having difficulties, it may be they can't deliver the process improvements that they've promised, and therefore that's the business will suffer as a result. And then the final point here is that organisations, their reputations can be quite badly affected. There are lots and lots of examples in the public domain about projects that have caused difficulties for organisations. Sometimes it's with customers, and sometimes it's with their staff. But I think most important of all is really the question about what about our project teams. The risks that I've described so far are visible, but the impact on people may be invisible, and this is really sort of the point behind the book. So if we take the tension between BAU and the project, as well as the challenge of juggling workload, other features of project life can be frustrating. So, for example, the people on the project can be working with people who are not direct reports, and they don't have the usual hierarchical means to get things done. And again, this is for some people, responsibility without direct authority can be stressful. When it comes to individual reputation, this is quite subtle. So, for example, the issues and change requests and all of the sort of changes that you have in a normal project is, I think, for us as project managers, is all quite normal. But for some business stakeholders, they perceive changes in cost, time, and scope as failure. And if the person on the project is associated with this inverted commas failing project, their peers must perceive them as failing too, even if their day job is fantastic. And then finally, I think it's it's very well documented about issues of well-being, stress, burnout, etc. But if we took an example, one of the most stressful things for people is a sense of not being in control of their life. BAU managers may feel this when they're conscripted onto a project because they are the most knowledgeable and experienced person in a particular subject. And I think with all of these things, the consequences may not appear immediately. Mental health issues can fester for a long time before erupting into sickness days or resignation, which is where the businesses get to find out how the risks have come about. So, does that still make sense? Any more questions?
Yeah, if you talk about composite, I think you mean that the business people are really working in the project and they have to produce some deliverables as well.
Yes.
In my experience, well, every project always has some business involvement. You interview people, you have to get input from the business.
Yeah.
But it's a very big difference if they also have to actually produce part of the work.
Yeah.
That makes it much harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the work that I do, I'm working with a set of work streams where you'll have a blend of people who may be external to the company. There may be people who have been seconded onto the project, maybe part-time, maybe full-time. And then you'll have subject matter experts who are there to provide advice, but not necessarily deliverables. And then there'll be people who are work stream leaders who have also to provide deliverables while they're still managing their work.
Right.
So I think that's sort of my experience. And I think talking to Francesca, I think it's not too dissimilar.
Yeah. As long as they just have to give input, it's relatively easy. But if they really have to do part of the work, that becomes much more difficult. Yeah.
And I think I suspect you'll also have examples where even if they only have to give input into a requirements workshop or something, and you hold that at month end, then you may struggle to get them there. So that's why any project is about making sure that you're sensitive to the way that the business is working. Okay, thank you. Good stuff. So we've now identified what a composite project is and what we need to look out for. So that sort of sets the scene. But what are the key things we can do to help deliver them successfully? Now, this is just a series of tips and tricks, so we don't go into too much detail. So I'll run through them relatively quickly, but please shout if you've got any queries. You'll recognise that some of these come from the methodologies. As Francesco noted at the beginning, I base things on Prince 2, but I think the methodologies are similar enough across the various different accreditations, so that works. And here we're also focusing on the things that are most applicable to composite projects. So I think the first thing is to have a great sponsor, but there are a few things you need to think about. Firstly, the sponsor is very unlikely to be your choice. As a project manager, you won't. I don't think you'll be very often choosing the executive sponsor, but you will understand composite projects, and therefore you have a chance to be able to influence them. It would be really helpful if they understood composite projects as a breed of projects, understand the features and risks of them. Ideally, they should be empathetic to the inevitable difficulties of a project. As I said earlier, the things that we take for granted are going to happen. Issues and risks or what have you, they don't necessarily happen every day in the business as usual environment, and therefore that we need some help with that. Inevitably, there's a tug of war of resources between business and the project, and our sponsor can help us with those disputes or negotiations. And then where there are BAU and project dilemmas, so for example, you might be wanting to choose a go-live date for your project, which is you have to pick a particular date, but it doesn't sit with the business, so it's really important that you can overcome those sorts of dilemmas. Okay. The vision, you don't necessarily see this in the methodologies, but I believe it's vital that the whole business understands what the vision is for the project, especially for a composite project. As we've said, the BAU staff are wrestling with their day job and the project, and an inspiring vision can really help. And I think the best way to explain this is with an example. I ran a project for Volkswagen Group in the UK. They were centralising their dealer training into a new facility in Milton Keynes, home of the Milton Keynes Dons, Brian. It was designed to be that's an injury, by the way. It was designed to be a brand statement as well as a functioning operation for about 400 delegates a day. So Volkswagen Group were very clever. They worked with a consultancy firm to create a documented vision. this acted as a fantastic guide for us on the project, and it covered everything from the way that the building should look like, the way the internal should look like, and it even went down to the sort of coffee. And the phrase was that in the vision was that the project would deliver great coffee to its delegates. On team selection, the team is obviously the engine room for the project, and it's how we get stuff delivered. But again, there are a number of things to think about. It may be that on a composite project, you'll have a limited choice in the team. A bit like the sponsor, some of the choices will have been made for you ahead of starting. And this might be driven because the project requires experts, and there might only be one or two of them in the business. You may also have to manage manage a sort of part-time and full-time approach. This isn't proper English, but I'll explain. I've worked on a number of projects where the subject matter experts work in small teams, and it's impossible to backfill their roles and second them into the project because their expertise, you can't bring somebody in to do their job for them because of the level of expertise. So therefore, they inevitably end up working on the project as well as their day job. Diplomacy. BAU line managers are often reluctant to let people go, and even if they do, they might well restrict their time on the project later on. So as a project manager, your diplomatic skills will be required on a composite project. And then in terms of recruiting a team, I think it's really important. This applies to most projects, but really particularly composite projects, is that you recruit the right person, not the first person. So anybody is usually not better than nobody, and you don't want to be replacing people on a composite project if you can at all help it. So we're stepping through, so please shout if you've got any questions. Just creeping through time. We're nicely on schedule.
Yeah, recruit not the first. Okay, if you have the opportunity, but sometimes they don't give you a choice. Eh?
Yeah, I think
just say, here is your man.
Yeah, I agree. But I think it's if you're taking the first person, then it's really important you do it in a conscious way, because sometimes you're better off leaving it for a couple of weeks until the right person from within the business becomes available. I think that the risk is that for some composite projects, the risk is your project team becomes people who happen to be available, as opposed to the people who happen to be right for the job.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah, on the other hand, I've experienced that if you take the second in class, he usually has more time. Like you have two resources in the Windows team, the one that knows everything and then the junior. The one that knows everything is highly demanded.
Yes.
So I usually played it the other way. I asked the junior, but with a guarantee for backup from the seniors. So
yeah.
This means I got some bandwidth with the junior because he had less work and he was not so requested by the other project managers. So he could work for my project, and if he had an issue, then he went to the senior and then he had all the job training, and still my project went ahead. So I think that the opposite of what you're stating. I was not choosing for the best guy, but I was choosing for the available guy, but with the guarantee that I had indirect access to the best guy.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point.
Arguably, that's a different definition of rights, though. Right doesn't necessarily mean the most qualified.
Yeah.
I like fit, survival of the fittest. Fit is how you see it.
I think on a composite project, you are always going to have to compromise, and I think it's the skill of the project manager to understand what you need from the project and its people, and try your best to fit that properly. Okay, thanks for that. So I gave you a preview of what we're talking about on the next slide. So again, we're still on time. So in the book, we looked at the skills and attributes required of the project manager best suited to a composite project. I've actually listened to some other seminars this week, which covered the need for project managers to learn the skills of project leaders. So I think this particular part of the presentation has quite a bit of a crossover between some of the others, and specifically the hashtag NextGenPM, which Camille Burrows, if I've pronounced his name properly, and apologies if I haven't. I think that was on Tuesday, but he very much talked about the sort of leadership qualities of project managers as we go into the future. So talking about the various different types of project manager and how they might be used on a composite project, do you recognise any of these phrases? They got us over the line, but the team was demotivated and 2 of them are now off with stress. Against, they got us over the line and the team learned so much and they can't wait for the next project. So I'd like to think that the projects that I've been involved with, the second comment is more appropriate. I hope. But for this particular segment, we're going to be looking at a stakeholder project management. So I won't sort of read them out, but it's sort of the leadership skills that are being talked about in other presentations sit on the left-hand side of that table. So if you think about the methodology, somebody who masters the methodology might tailor it so that it fits with a composite environment. The commerciality point, that's about a project manager who can relate to and gain the trust of the business as usual managers. And I think it helps if you've got previous experience in the area of actually running departments or what have you. For emotionally intelligent, they can deal with the tensions between the business as usual and the project and negotiate potential solutions. And finally, on the delivery point, the project manager should leave people in good shape after a successful delivery. These are just 4 examples. I think that there are more. And maybe you want to, this can be quite, in the past, this has been quite controversial, so you may have some views on this. As in any project, it's vital to start right. And here are some just quick tips and tricks. You may not choose the team, but you will have to build it. To be truthful, this is the same as building any team, but you're blending people from different environments, so extra care is required. When it comes to understanding your team, I believe it's important that you allocate extra time to see all of the project team members one-to-one. They'll have unique challenges as they navigate their project and BAU tension. But I think if you've got an understanding of what their world looks like, then you have a better, you can prepare and you know what happens in advance of issues. And this 3 words doesn't really do this segment justice really, but I think initiation is really powerful. And it doesn't just mean the project initiation document, it means the process by which you go through to create the document. And if you can do that with your team, you can build some great documentation material that can then work with your stakeholders. And having the team properly engaged in that whole initiation process, I think makes a big difference. So again, shout if you've got any disagreements with that, or Involving people effectively starts with the initiation process, as we've just covered. I think the other key steps are consulting with BAU managers. I think the normal project communications plan will always cover BAU managers as one of your target groups for communication. But in my experience, it's really important to do more than that. So, for example, a bit like you've done with your project team members at the beginning of a project, having one-to-one meetings with key BAU managers will help you, again, overcome issues during the project, but also gain trust with them. The comms plan will cover launch and ongoing communications and messages. However, given the business involvement in composite projects, it's important to ensure they understand objectives, status, issues, and the overall plan. I think that's vital. And then finally on this one, I think reports need to be frequent, accurate, and brief. The one pages are great for this sort of stuff. And on my travels, I picked up a great phrase, which was green, 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 train crash, which indicates that people don't necessarily tell the truth when they're doing their project reports. And unfortunately, they're not necessarily being accurate until it comes to a crunch, and it can be horrible and unpleasant and not very nice. And if you follow the guidance, then things should be going well. But what about the day-to-day? Again, just a few tips and tricks. This can be quite tricky for project managers, but this is running the plan sensitively. So it means being flexible. So where you come against a day job stroke project conflict, it's about being flexible. If the task isn't on the critical path, then maybe you can allow some slack in the due date. I think with composite projects, it's vital that you fend off scope creep. The reason for this is that any time, cost, and scope changes are likely to impact straight into the business. Probably slightly more practical meetings. I believe that you'll retain the motivation of the team if you make your meetings short and snappy. It also helps if you can get your project meetings into people's diaries for the duration of the project. Make sure they fit around month end and so on. That way you'll create regular slots with good attendance and keep the team on board. And again, finally, the section, the tackling the day job. So again, I think this starts with your one-to-ones with your project team. You're going to find the tensions, and you can deploy management techniques to overcome potential issues in the project going forward. So just one example might be to ensure that the sponsor supports the team and is visible and encouraging throughout the time. So to summarise then, it's vital that the projects are recognised so that you can then plan accordingly. You should use the correct approach, which means they're stakeholder-driven rather than methodology-driven. Effective use of the sponsor is critical, as we've discussed. They can be a massive ally. Understanding the team. Can you inspire them with a vision? Don't expect them to automatically be a team from day one. That's probably going to have to be your job to make it that way. And then make sure you involve the business as usual managers. And then respect people's time. So concise comms, keeping things simple, adapting the methodology, giving them nice, easy delivery. I don't mean easy in terms of, I mean, small, frequent deliverables are better than longer tasks. Tackle the day job issue, and then know what and when to flex timescales. And all being well, you'll increase your chance of success. So, any questions up to that point? think we'll pick them up in a minute. So I think before we jump into any more questions, just want to say big thanks for listening. The copies of the slides will be available. Interestingly, on this particular point, when we approached the publisher, they said this was a common scenario, but nothing was written about it, which was quite surprising to us. So hopefully we can start a bit of a conversation going on this topic, because I think it's something which deserves a bit more attention than it's already had. So thank you very much. So Francesca, is there any more questions that have come through? Any burning issues that we've got? What have we got? We've got another
no, there is
five or so minutes.
Yeah, there is no question in the chat, so I really invite the participants to ask questions if they have. And I would like to thank you, Stuart, because really, as I said, you have depicted, I think, the reality of most of us.
Yeah.
In terms of, if I may ask a question, in terms of sponsor, say management, what is your advice there? In, for example, addressing the conflicting priorities between BAU and project activities, because I bring you the example, my personal example. My manager, which is the CEO, he is responsible of the BAU, but as well expects me to deliver change to their BAU teams. So he has conflicting priorities there as well. And so what is your advice in managing and the use of the sponsor? Because of course I cannot go to the sponsor every 5 minutes. So when do you advise to involve the sponsor, in which situations?
I think are you talking about a specific project? Because if you are, I'll assume, let's talk about a specific project. So I think the most important thing is to get to speak to the sponsor as soon as possible, and to discuss the likely nature of the project, given that it's going to be using people from the business, people who are seconded, externals, etc., and explain the likely conflicts that are going to happen around month end, around resources, and try and predict some of the likely exchanges that you may get with people. I guess in most of the projects that I run, because I do lots of work with the same customer and the same customers, their environment is very much that most project work is done this way anyway, so they're used to it. But I think it's the most important thing is to try and speak to the sponsor to ensure that you've got as many of those predicted issues that may come up at the beginning, and then you can put in place in the plan things to mitigate them. Does that help? That feels like a bit of a rambling answer.
No, yeah, absolutely helps. And we have a question from Danny, which is quite, I think, might be a tricky one. And he's asking, how can you actually select the project sponsor? I mean, Danny, you as a project manager, meaning selecting the right project sponsor, and you can unmute yourself so you can also speak, I believe. No. I unmute you. No, we don't do it.
I'll pick it up anyway, because it's a good point. So what I said was, as a project manager, it's unlikely that you will have a role in choosing the executive sponsor. But if you're, because normally the sponsor would choose the project manager, but it all depends. If you have a relationship with the senior management team, and as a project manager, you are being asked your advice about who the project team would be for a new project, then you may have an opportunity to influence the sort of person that the project sponsor would, or the sort of skills and attributes that the project sponsor would have. That's one thing. I guess it's about, because in the organisations I work in, then normally I've got access to quite a lot of the senior team, so they may well ask that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if you don't have access to help choose the project sponsor, what you can do is, with your skills and experience of composite projects, is run through with them at the first meetings, as I said earlier, the likely problems that you may come across where you have conflicts between the business and project resourcing. I also find that sometimes project sponsors, it could be it might be the first time they've done it, so they will lean quite heavily on the project manager. So I think there are sort of three different scenarios where you may be able to influence the project sponsor. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Danny's saying that helps a lot.
Yeah, good.
So I'm the voice of Danny.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Danny.
And we have Leven is writing in the chat. I hope I pronounced well your name, and apologies if I didn't. He's actually asking if we can establish that, say, on our CV, you should earn more recognition for being able to run successfully composite project instead of big project, because in big projects you get all the priorities, so you have the project team dedicated and so on, which is, let's say, hints that it's kind of more challenging, let's say, run composite projects compared to big projects. What's your opinion?
I agree, actually. I think big projects, so the big, as we refer to them in the book, the level one projects are resourced with dedicated teams, typically, again, which means that they're 100% focused on the project and they don't have to worry about the business as well. Even down to relatively small projects, there will be a conflict between business and the project, and you have to be a coach, a negotiator. You have to gain credibility with the people that you're taking onto the project. So you need quite a number of, and we've referred to the stakeholder project manager, but what you're actually talking about there is some reasonably sophisticated leadership skills. If you have a project team that's fully dedicated to building a building or building a system, I would argue that might be easier because you're using traditional management skills where you have a hierarchy in place, and those sorts of normal. You don't need to cajole and persuade. People do stuff because they work for you. So hopefully that helps.
So Stuart, your the intriguing title of your presentation, projects as homework, does it mean we have to avoid that the projects become homework, or
no,
that is the reality that cannot be avoided?
No, I think that so our argument is that people working in the business who have work on projects to do as well, it isn't wrong provided the projects are recognised and they're recognised in advance, and that you structure them in a particular way with the right setup, with the right behaviour from the sponsor, with the right plan that flexes around month ends and things like that, and you respect the people who are doing their day job plus their project as homework. So I think they're a reality, and there's nothing wrong with them provided they're managed properly. Unfortunately, if they aren't recognised and they're not managed properly, what tends to happen in my experience is that conscientious people work hard on their day job, they work hard on their project responsibilities, and then when they finish the project, they're in a bit of a heap on the floor because they're completely stressed out. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Any more?
Any more questions for Stuart? Well, I would say no then.
Do I need to give you back control then? So,
yes, please, Stuart. So we take really this. I really ask you to stay with us really for one more minute so that we can wrap up and close this really interesting session from my side at least. Thank you. I cannot still share my my screen. So
there we go. That should give you control back.
So maybe no, there is a last minute question I would say that's from Leven that says, can we share some experience? You mean some of us sharing experience here with the audience?
What I mean, I don't know the other people, so they might be much more experienced project managers than me. But I think in common, we all 20, we have some experience. So some things that worked for me is if I have a very busy BIU guy in my project meetings, I just invite him for the 10 minutes that I need him. So he gets there, we first treat his points, and then we send him off while we're doing the remainder of the project meeting. So that's usually highly appreciated. And appreciation also helps in cooperation. And then another point was setting priorities. So if I have tasks that are low priority, I explicitly tell the people that it's low priority so that they know they have some slack and get less pressure. And I think this also helps me because if a task is low pressure, it's easier and maybe they will just start with the task because it's it's a low pressure.
Yeah, two good examples. Well done.
Yeah, and
I had a third point, but I can't remember right now. I am planning Slack in projects. So after project phase, you plan Slack where nothing happens, but that's the buffer time for when, because in our company, BAU has priorities. So I can plan project meetings, but if there's a crisis, people have to extinguish the fire, and there goes my project.
Yeah.
So I tend to plan Slack at the end of phases. So if something happens and I have delay, then the Slack helps me to catch up with the delay. But the problem is that you have to be able to defend this Slack to your customer because it looks like a delay, or you have to disguise it and plan stuff that looked obvious, but is in fact your disguise Slack. So my question is, there are other project managers in this session, and so maybe someone else has similar tips and tricks.
Well, if I may say, in terms of project meetings, what I do is so I apply the let's say the Scrum way of managing team to my project teams. It means that we have a short meeting every day, so a daily stand-up meeting of around, let's say, 15-20 minutes maximum, where everyone says mainly focuses on the issues that they. So the three questions that usually I ask roundtable, it's what have you done yesterday, what you plan to do today, is there anything that blocks you and that we can help you to unblock. So that's it's far more effective from my side when you have composite projects like people that do more stuff at the same time. Far more effective than having a long weekly meeting. And then, of course, I have usually weekly reporting to the management and to the sponsor. But then I sum it up, and I leverage personally on the on Teams, on Microsoft Teams, as a communication channel to inform and collect information. So I really use the team meetings to focus on any blocking point and issues. Yeah. That's my how I get out of this and use the time in a more efficient way.
They're really good examples.
Well, thank you, Leven, for the for starting this quite interesting discussion as I find. So I propose that we wrap up now, and so we go towards the end of the session. Give me 1 second so that I share my screen. Share content, screen one. Again, sorry, it started from the start. So thank you, Stuart, again for the session as a project, as homework and not as a main assignment, I would say. So I will put the details for the PDU claim here now in the chat, and I'm announcing the winner of the subscription, which is Eric Putmans. And apologies if I didn't pronounce well your family name. Okay, so great job. Thank you very much, Stuart. And
thank you, everyone.
I hope you to see again in a future session then.
Okay, thank you.
Goodbye,
Thank
you,
everyone.
guys.
Bye bye.
Yes, good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Stuart. Well done, Eric. Good job, Francesco. Cheers, Stuart.
Yeah, cheers, Brian. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Yeah, I hope the dons, as you call them, go down.